Coffee was introduced to Vietnam in the 1800s, and throughout the French colonial period, Arabica coffee was actually grown on many French-owned plantations. Nonetheless, due to a variety of political and economic factors, Vietnam was slow to achieve any real relevance as a coffee-producing nation. As of 1990, Vietnam was responsible for a tiny 1% of world coffee trade. This had all changed by 1990, by which point Vietnam had reached its current place as the second highest producing coffee country in the world after Brazil, a result of heavy investment in coffee production, made possible by the liberalization of land ownership in the mid-1980s and World Bank policy recommendations incentivizing farmers to produce coffee for export. The country's story of rapid growth, however, left little room for high-quality coffee. Some 95% of the country's production is Robusta, and although Arabica coffee production has been increasing in recent years due to the expansion in growing area and yield improvement, it still accounts for very little of the overall coffee production in Vietnam. Vietnam's coffee industry is expected to grow strongly in the coming years as the population continues to expand at a rate of about 1 million people a year, and the country and the tastes of its people become more sophisticated. Increased activity at both consumer and trade levels from local and international players is another factor that is expected to fuel the industry's growth.
If you look back through history, it's easy to spot examples of languages that were once prominent and later disappeared from use. Take Latin for example. You may have studied the language in high school, but it's a dead language, written and studied, but not spoken. Out of more than 7,000 languages spoken on our planet, a language dies every 2 weeks, ceasing to be actively spoken. Why do languages go extinct? The process of a culture and a people completely abandoning an entire language takes a long time, even spanning several generations. When a new dominant language appears on the scene, an eventual erosion of the older language occurs. Language shifts happen throughout history as one tongue overtakes another. For example, in the UK, the shift from Cornish to English has been occurring for decades and continues today. Other reasons for a language becoming extinct include political persecution, globalization, and a lack of preservation. For much of the 20th century, governments across the world have coerced indigenous peoples to adopt a common national language, thus forcing native languages to the sidelines and eventually to the ash heap of history.
Bone health is a critical factor for healthy aging. Bones are responsible for many of the body's functions, including movement, organ protection, blood cell production, mineral storage, and support for the rest of our body. Genes contribute to an individual's bone health. Environmental factors, such as diet and physical activity, also play a critical role in the health of bones throughout the lifespan, and importantly, these factors can be modified. Nutritional deficiencies, such as insufficient vitamin D intake, can result in weak, poorly mineralized bones, and hence bone mass and strength. The most common bone disease is osteoporosis, which typically doesn't occur until late in life. Bone loss results as bones continue to break down, but bone formation, or remodeling, is reduced. The resultant loss of bone mass leads to structural abnormalities that make the skeleton more fragile. This resultant fragility increases the risk of fractures with or without trauma.
Traditionally, European and American theatrical dance centered on ballet. However, in the early 20th century, it became fashionable in dance circles to rebel against the strictures of tradition. The first two well-known American dancers to break away from classical ballet were Isadora Duncan and Ruth St. Denis. Although their styles differed, Duncan and St. Denis's unconventional approaches opened the door to a new era in dance history, the American modern dance movement of the 1920s. Leaders of this movement based their works on personal experience, using their bodies as instruments to express such emotions as passion, fear, joy, or grief. Rather than adhering to a set form and a limited range of gestures, as in ballet, the dancer created form as an outgrowth of his or her own communicative impulses. Since its founding, modern dance has been redefined many times. Though it clearly is not ballet by any traditional definition, it often incorporates balletic movement, and though it may also refer to any number of additional dance elements, those of folk dancing or ethnic, religious, or social dancing, for example, it may also examine one simple aspect of movement. As modern dance changes in the concepts and practices of new generations of choreographers, the meaning of the term modern dance grows more ambiguous. It is often observed that some people are more motivated than others. The underlying mechanisms driving motivation have been long studied by the scientists. Psychologists make a distinction between two approaches that people take to human capacities and character traits. She refers to the first as a fixed mindset. People with a fixed mindset see their capacities, for example their intelligence, as static. They believe that your capabilities, for example your level of intelligence or musicality, are largely determined by natural talent that can only be developed to a very minor extent, if at all. She refers to the second approach as a growth mindset. People with a growth mindset see their capabilities as innate potential, which is there to be developed. People with a fixed mindset regarding a particular capacity tend to focus on proving that they already possess this capacity rather than on the process of learning. They neglect the learning process, which obviously stunts their development and affects the way they function. People with a growth mindset, on the other hand, tend to make an effort to learn and develop strategies for learning and improving their long-term performance. A person's mindset defines their motivation or lack of it in pursuing education, career, sports, and everything else.
Apple is the most valuable company on the planet. With a market capitalization of more than $950 billion, it could be the first company to reach $1 trillion market cap. What makes a company like this continue to lead the world in terms of growth and innovation? It can be summed up in one fundamental that all companies can learn from: organize the company more like a startup than a corporation. Steve Jobs often talked about how Apple's structure is not like that of traditional companies. In fact, he saw Apple as the world's largest startup. Do you know how many committees we have at Apple? 0. Steve Jobs talked about how the structure of the business performs best when they break up work into areas where one person is in charge of key aspects of the business like operating systems, hardware, marketing, etc. They meet for 3 hours each week to talk about what they are working on. This keeps them working on their projects in separate groups, but also allows them to know what the other teams are doing too. At Apple, the best ideas win in the meetings. Jobs was never expected to have all the ideas. In fact, he demanded the teams to collaborate around the ideas. Jobs would spend much of his time floating between teams to work on ideas and solve problems. Company leaders who allow the best ideas to surface and collaborate to make them even better are the ones who will make better products.
Almost every society and culture has a story of salt, either the producing or selling of it or how to get it. There's a lot about the early history of salt that isn't known, including who first used it, and when or how it was discovered that it preserved food. We were sort of handed, in history, this world where everyone knew about salt. And it's not clear exactly how that developed. The salt tax was one of the greatest grievances that led to the French Revolution. It was even the case with Gandhi's Salt March, where he used salt to bring together the masses for a movement and protest against the salt tax. I think that the great lesson of salt history is that salt lost its value. This thing that people were willing to fight and die over, and form economies with, became much less valuable and much less important than it had been over a fairly short period of time. You have to remember that before the Industrial Revolution, a very large part of international trade was food products, and the only way a food product could be saleable internationally was if it was preserved in salt. There was no refrigeration or freezing. It became central to international trade.
As an urban planner, your mission is to guide the urban development of an existing or new community while considering public and environmental welfare. Your careful planning needs to factor in aspects that make it a convenient, healthful, efficient, and equitable place to live and work. No matter if you're designing a new community space entirely from scratch or adding additional neighborhoods to an existing city plan, one can often find themselves limited by what is currently possible. Planning, by definition, should focus on the future goals and aspirations of a society. To stop yourself from getting stuck in complacency, try asking if your design plans are for yesterday, today, or tomorrow. Try to think past today's comfort levels and instead forward into the challenges of tomorrow. Also, the physical environment must be accounted for in modern urban planning. This includes location and proximity to resources, overall climate and seasonal climate patterns, and even smaller details such as if the geographical area has hard or soft water reservoirs that can, over time, have detrimental effects to irrigation and piping systems. Moreover, weather conditions from everything such as snow, rain, and wind to larger phenomena like hurricanes and tornadoes should be at the forefront of an urban planner's mind during the building design or renovation process.
I think one of the really interesting things is to grow old in a society that is itself aging is very different from growing old in a young society. And if you look at the case, for example, in Africa, where there in sheer numbers, there are so many older adults, but they're a very small percentage of the population because there are so many young people. And therefore, most of the resources are invested in young people. If you look at the States, and in particular many European countries and some of our Far Eastern countries like Korea and Japan, where they have very, very few young people and a large number and a large percentage of older adults, inevitably resources are going to be shifted to the older adults. And I think one of the things that we now are talking about is what we call the generational contract. And the generational contract exists everywhere. And it's the idea that when you are an adult, if you have a child, you look after that child, and then that child grows up, you become elderly, and the child looks after you. And in a traditional society, that will be done within the household or the family. You actually physically care for your older parents and grandparents. And in a modern society, we do it through healthcare, long-term care, pensions, and young people pay taxes, and that funds a whole system of support for older people.
Without light cues that the rest of us rely on to synchronize our body clocks, as many as half of these blind people may have difficulty getting sleep schedules in step with a 24-hour cycle and may suffer sleep disorders as a result. But a new study shows that a daily dose of melatonin may be able to help reset a blind person's unregulated body clock to a daily schedule, making it easier to rise and shine. Melatonin is a hormone produced every evening by the brain's pineal gland. Apparently, the chemical helps facilitate the onset of sleep. Darkness serves as a cue for the body to secrete melatonin into the bloodstream, and light serves to suppress it. Melatonin production drops with age, possibly causing the elderly to get less sleep. People with normal vision can use light, transmitted through the retina to the brain's internal clock, to reset their internal schedule to the Earth's 24-hour rotation. Blind people, however, lack this visual cue, leaving them more susceptible to fall into a 25-hour rhythm that eventually disrupts a daily sleep schedule. Melatonin has been believed to act as a replacement for the light cues. While melatonin use is believed to be safe in the short term, researchers have not established whether it may cause complications in the long term.
Agriculture is a major source of GHGs which contribute to the greenhouse effect and climate change. However, the changing climate is having far-reaching impacts on agricultural production, which are likely to challenge food security in the future. Climate change is likely to contribute substantially to food insecurity in the future, by increasing food prices and reducing food production. Food may become more expensive as climate change mitigation efforts increase energy prices. Water required for food production may become more scarce due to increased crop water use and drought. Competition for land may increase as certain areas become climatically unsuitable for production. In addition, extreme weather events associated with climate change may cause sudden reductions in agricultural productivity, leading to rapid price increases. For example, heat waves in the summer of 2010 led to yield losses in key production areas including Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, and contributed to a dramatic increase in the price of staple foods. These rising prices forced growing numbers of local people into poverty, providing a sobering demonstration of how the influence of climate change can result in food insecurity. Crop production is projected to decrease in many areas during the 21st century because of climatic changes. Some risks to crop production from climate change and extreme weather events have been identified, and strategies to help maintain production have been suggested.
Now that you know why a plant-based diet is better for your health and the Earth's health, you are well prepared to address your friends when they raise the issue of the ethics of killing animals for food. You can tell them that the ethical issue is probably not the most convincing reason for you to change your meat-eating ways. You can tell them that it is far more convincing for you to change to a vegetarian diet because of the health effects it will have for you. You can add that another compelling reason is that a plant-based diet is less burdensome on the planet's resources. You can bolster your argument by telling them how the production of the vegetarian diet creates less pollution in the Earth's land, air, and water environments. You are going to be a fantastic pitch person on this topic because you know that scientific research backs you up. Now that you can convincingly argue the benefits of the plant-based diet for your friends, you are really going to want to make the change for yourself. So, put down that burger and start planning a new, plant-based menu for yourself. Human error is natural. It is the result of the human brain's design and its limitations. We actually need to make mistakes to help us learn. For most people, mistakes are not intentional. They're also unavoidable. You will, inevitably, make a mistake one day. A good manager knows that mistakes happen. It's when the same mistakes happen or happen frequently. As understanding as leadership can be, there's no free pass to ignore mistakes and have a carefree approach to work. The simple reality is that you purposefully need to create standardized systems, processes and methods, else you will always have high failure rates and poor performance. The typical failure rates in businesses using common work practices range from 10 to 30 errors per 100 opportunities. The best performance possible in well-managed workplaces using normal quality management methods are failure rates of 5 to 10 in every 100 opportunities. These outcomes are the natural result of the work quality assurance processes used. Even with highly experienced and able people doing the work, you will get excessive rates of failure. Letting people work from experience and knowledge always creates unwanted random variation that too often produces wrong outcomes. So, it is important to use well-designed and standardized approach to tasks so the mistakes can be avoided.
Imagine that you are walking down the street and see nothing but stones, ruins, fissures on the land. It's dark and you even do not see what is happening near you because of fog and soot. Do you try to get something attractive? Do you want to see blue sea and white seagulls over it? But again, you see nothing but the cruel reality, and the saddest thing is that you realize there is nowhere to run to escape this. It is our world. This is what happened with the planet as a result of human activity. Do you wish you could leave, not because of yourself, but because of your children? You do not want them to grow up in such environment. Do you realize that they'll never see the things you saw, green trees, blue skies, pure water? They will not understand what the fresh air means. They will hardly believe in stories about fish in the sea, birds in the sky. But, maybe you will not even wish to tell them what you saw, because you are sure they will probably ask, so what happened? Why everything turned to be so bad? Who is guilty? And it will be difficult to explain to them that people have destroyed their own lives. All are living on one planet. Who will save it for our children, for new generation, if we don't? The size of the universe cannot be measured, and the number of stars it has is also uncountable. For years, we have known that there are millions and millions of stars in the universe. But shouldn't the entire sky be as bright as a star, since there's a star in every possible minute direction you could ever look in? This question was famously asked by the German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers, who described it in 1823. We now call this Olbers' paradox after him. The paradox goes like this: if the universe is infinite, static and has existed forever, then everywhere you look should eventually hit a star. Our experiences tell us this isn't the case. So by proposing this paradox, Olbers knew the universe couldn't be infinite, static, and timeless. It could be a couple of these, but not all three. In the 1920s, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe isn't static. In fact, galaxies are speeding away from us in all directions. And so, paradox solved. We don't see stars in every direction, because many of the stars haven't been around long enough for their light to get to us.